I've been recently looking at the research on this field called employability, and which is the idea of like when you graduate university, like do you actually get a job, and also does that job provide you more than just income? Like for example, is it the life that you want to lead, right? Or are you simply just graduating to become like this lifeless, soulless, sort of shadow that works to keep the corporate machine running type thing, you know?
Sounds like you're a doctor, yeah.
Yeah.
In this episode, I'm joined by special co-host Will Wang from Growth Labs, and we're very excited to dive deep into the world of more effective studying and learning with the co-founders of iCanStudy, helping anyone from students to professionals use effective evidence-based systems for studying, time management, and productivity derived from research and designed from their experience. Dr. Justin Sung is a medical doctor and certified teacher, and during medical school, helped establish Social Innovation New Zealand, the country's largest student group for social enterprise. Having worked with tens of thousands of students aged between 10 to 70 from over 100 countries, Justin has always been awarded distinction in 5 specialties throughout his training and co-authored 4 research publications in peer-reviewed journals. He also runs a highly popular YouTube channel with over 100,000 subscribers where he shares more of his techniques, thoughts, and advice on all things to do with learning efficiently. His co-founder, Michael Tsai, head of strategy at iCanStudy, is a seasoned speaker, education consultant, learning designer, and professional coach with a track record creating multiple education-based startups such as iCanMed. He shares a mission with Justin to help change the way students and professionals are investing in their learning pursuits via mainstream methods. Michael, Justin, welcome to the show.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Awesome. All right, so you boys run a company called iCanStudy, and you guys are co-founders together. So really interested in sort of digging into a little bit more about that. But before we get into that, I'm really curious to hear sort of your upbringing, where you boys basically grew up, and basically what family was like. So I'll probably start with you, Michael.
Yeah, no problem. So was born in Taiwan. Was born in a smaller city. My parents basically grew up in regional parts, and through that process, I guess eventually I ended up in New Zealand. I think I was maybe 6 or 7 when I moved over there.
You're old. Oh, I thought you moved when you were super young.
Not super young.
Yeah.
And ended up in Christchurch. Eventually went to high school, a little bit there, and then went to Auckland. Through that process of moving, learned a lot, obviously more about myself, what I wanted to do. Eventually medicine was something I was interested in. And having gone through the program to get into medical school, I realized that education was something that was a pretty big deal, and especially coming from a, I guess, more typical Asian household, although my parents were very open-minded and quite liberal, thank goodness. I eventually found myself falling into the education space. And going through that process, realized that a lot of small things can be done that make huge differences. And seeing hardworking students, not just of the Asian descent, but of every particular background, trying to achieve their goals and basically limiting themselves without realizing, was something that I became really kind of passionate and driven about. And since then, running a lot of businesses, working with organizations, and really identifying the kind of things that I care about, put me in the position where pretty much I went, hey, look, Justin, I think it's about time we do something about this.
Yeah.
And that's when I contacted Justin, who happened to be a long time ago, one of my mentees or students, helping them get into med school with giving advice about what not to do, what to do, that type of thing. So it kind of all started there.
Awesome. And then Justin?
Yeah, so I was born in Korea, came to New Zealand when I was 2 years old. Originally spent 1.5 years at a place called Rotorua, and then moved to Christchurch where I did all my schooling, and then moved up to Auckland for university because there's only 2 medical schools in New Zealand. One of them is in Auckland, one of them is down south, and we moved up to Auckland to be in like a bigger city and expose myself to more things. And at the time I was like, well, trying to get into medical school, how do I do that? And then like I found this seminar thing that Michael was running, and then I, walked in and saw this large, like domineering kind of like
booming voice.
Yeah, booming voice, like a subwoofer manifest into a human.
That's first impression.
Yeah, and but then did the seminar. I thought, oh, this is like pretty cool. So I became one of his students. Went through like a very extreme sort of pre-med year to get into medical school, and ended up being accepted into medical school. And then I guess I started sort of having this sort of two things simultaneously going on, where I was really interested in like working, and I had like ideas about one day setting up my own business. And I was also interested in like education and teaching. Like I'd done heaps of like teaching related stuff in high school and things like that as well. So worked for Michael actually as an employee. I think it's like the only time I was ever an employee.
Yeah.
Never again.
One and only.
Yeah. Doing like some like teaching related stuff, but also like some web dev, which I'd been involved in like also through high school. Went through medical school while also kind of working at the same time, and just got really, really invested in education, doing more and more education related stuff, and eventually kind of through a long process ending up in the situation where we thought iCanStudy would be a good thing. Graduated and worked as a doctor in a public hospital for a couple of years, and I just thought, nah, this, and I left.
Wasn't for you.
Yeah, big story there. But yeah, I mean, yeah, eventually decided that like it's not the path that I wanted. In fact, even had a sort of podcast, arguably still have a podcast, not super regular on that, where we talked about like medicine and what it was like and that path, because it's like the coveted, it's the holy land, right? Like
It's the Asian golden child
Yeah,
pathway, wasn't it?
My mum probably had a post of you.
Yeah.
Bro, like, you know, there's like this, I can't remember, it's like saying, like when you become a doctor, if you become a doctor in Korea, you get like 3 keys or something. Like you get like a car, a house, and some other key. I don't know what it, but like, it's just the idea that like, if you become a doctor, you just, you know, people just want you to like marry their kids, and, you know, you're just
No
societally.
exaggeration whatsoever.
Yeah.
When I used to go back to Korea, which I didn't do very often, but when I used to go back, like,
Or did you have all these people lined up?
no. Like,
People are throwing their dowries at you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
no, stop. No. Like, because, you know, this cultural kind of like, I didn't really know the Korean culture very well, and all the students that at my high school, like most of the Korean kids were kind of like international student, like degenerates that were like selling drugs on the side, you know, type thing. I was like, man, Korea's a screwed up place. Like, I don't want anything to do with it. I sort of, you know, disregarded that part of my identity. And then when I went to Korea, I sort of had, I guess, like cultural tendencies, mannerisms that are not normal, you know, for like an Asian culture. And so people normally would be like, oh, what a rude child, right? But instead, the response that I got was like, oh, like that's how a medical student like acts. Like,
Really?
It's like, as expected of such a child. Like, you know,
What
like,
a genius.
I got a categorical exception to all my behavior by just being like another type of like entity, essentially.
He's face down the gutter drunk. He's like, oh, that's amazing. Good job.
He's in his zone of genius right now. Is that the same in Taiwan, would you say?
I think in Taiwan, like it's quite interesting because I would say a lot of people at my parents' age, they had to go through a lot to gain like stability. So that's one of the things, you know, and it's kind of like, oh, medicine gives you that. Plus you get to help people. And it's like a double, you know, bonus type of thing. So that's definitely something there. And I think the culture has always been about survival, you know, as I mentioned. And it's just like, well, what's the quickest way to be okay, you know? And healthcare has always been one of those things. And but beyond that, you know, I think the idea of helping people out, treating them, and especially like, you know, you might have this village somewhere, and then you might have, for example, a person who's really in need, and then there happened to be like this doctor around, and they happen to come over, and then they like help them out big time, and then that's the memory they have of healthcare professionals. So that's definitely something there.
There's more than that, right? Because it's like the idea of like face and image is such a big part in Asian cultures, you know, more in some countries than others. And if you're a doctor, like that's that prestige. Like not only do you get to be proud of your work, but all of your family gets to be proud through you as well. Like and you are the
and I think being a doctor like kind of is the quickest way, it seems, to just take care of everything. like
solves all problems.
Yeah.
And it's to the extent where, you know, I run a business also that helps people get into medical school, and we help them with like interview prep and, you know, other testing, you know, preparation, because nowadays you can't just do art at school. you got to do all these other things.
Yep.
And I get students who come up to me after getting the offer, and they're like, thanks so much, blah blah blah, and like for all your help, and say, okay, no problem. And then 3 days later, they contact me again and go, Michael, why am I not feeling more excited? Like I thought this
this was the holy grail.
This is the holy grail. This is gonna be it. I didn't actually think about beyond getting into medicine, the kind of doctor I want to become, what my life will look like. I just thought the moment that I got that letter, life will sort itself out. And that's obviously not how it works. We know that. But then a lot of times you talk to these parents and they genuinely believe in it as well, that it'll just sort itself out, don't worry. And I think it's convenient to talk about these topics within the kind of Asian culture, where maybe there isn't a lot of discussion surrounding, okay, is that really the right way of thinking? And it's just the way that everyone thinks. And as a result, it must be right, of course, that's how it is.
It's even more, it's like, how dare you not think
right.
that's the right path?
We talk about, hey, look, every job has its challenges, and you got to look at medicine as something that you have to, there's I tell students, there's great doctors and there are doctors that are not so great, like any other job, and also opportunities, right? They're not guaranteed, and then some parents just can't accept the fact that what do you mean? You become a doctor, everyone loves you, you're needed everywhere. And there's absolute stability, and you look at the rate in which medical schools are pumping out their students. It's there's a lot of people coming, and something's got to give, but they just can't accept that as a truth.
And you mentioned your family was pretty liberal. Justin, was your family
the
the same?
Yeah, my family was fairly open-minded and progressive. It's very fortunate. Yeah.
I think that's a very common thing between both of us.
Yeah. I mean, we work with a lot of students that they don't have that. They have we have students whose parents literally have told them to their face, if you do not get into medicine, we will disown you. It's not even implicit. It's not I feel like my parents will disown me. It's they have said it.
It is very clear.
It's an ultimatum, and then they break down, of course.
In fact, I had a conversation with a parent who their kid was really struggling. They were, I can't remember if they were in medical school or if they were trying to get into medical school, but they were really, really struggling. And they were not academically struggling, but mentally, psychologically.
Pressure.
The pressure and a lot of things, they had a lot of issues. They were borderline suicidal. So there's a lot of these cases, actually.
What do you say to them usually in that situation, or how do you react?
It's really, really difficult. I mean, your role and boundary, and also, I mean, for me, I think partly influenced by my medical background is, I guess that's ironic, is that when I see someone like this, I'm thinking, at a certain point, I'm just thinking about safety. It's so there's been a few times where I've had to just call the police to get them to go over to my
Really?
students.
You have to call the police to get involved?
To take them to the hospital, to ED, because I have a legitimate fear for their safety, and I'll meet them in ED because no one else knows. I'm the only person that
they reach out to,
talking to. Their parents don't know. But anyway, I had a student that was in that type of situation, and they told their dad about it, and then the dad was like, it's fine if you're depressed as long as you become a doctor.
Wow.
And then you can, he was basically,
you just work it out afterwards.
He was like, you can just figure it out afterwards. And it's why don't you become a doctor? You make yourself proud, okay? And then if you become depressed, then, you can deal with that. Don't put all of your life.
So crazy though, because I wouldn't have thought in this generation that parents are still like that.
It's just weird, right? Because if you think about it, these are immigrants as well most of the time. Yeah. They left that society. They were like, this is not a society that we think is healthy for our child to be raised in. Let us raise them in another society in the same way.
Have you ever considered a comedic career? Because you'd be great. You'd be pointing out these really obvious things.
Humor is the vehicle for
for the truth, right? That's it.
Yeah, that's
right?
the main thing.
Especially in sarcasm. Yeah. So, how did you, obviously mentor-mentee relationship. So where did iCanStudy come in, around what time, and what was the backstory with that being developed?
Yeah, so I think, realizing that students really are putting so much effort, attention into achieving their goals. And the fact is that, they are kind of being told, right, these very simple, very, very simple messages about how to succeed. Whereas it was very obvious when I went through it, when Justin went through it, that wasn't the complete truth.
And working with people, you can just see.
Yeah, you can see it.
Like if someone says this is the way you succeed, and you see you and your friends, and it's like, okay, some of my friends did well. But then if you're in our position where we're actually educators and we're seeing not just a few, but like hundreds or even thousands of people applying an approach, we can really start seeing the trends. Like this actually is not, it's a total scam. Like this advice is not the truth. It's like this perpetuated sort of belief that is like causing damage with each generation. And I think we independently realized that because we each had separate businesses, working with students, heavily involved in like this medicine kind of area. And we just saw that like the same trends, like we have the same conclusions about this, completely independently formed through observing this.
Yeah. And I think a lot of it is just like, they do these things and they just hope. And, like it's interesting because I'm pretty sure, although I didn't ask them this question, it's like, how much money would you bet on yourself for you to achieve your goals? Like, given the way that you're going about it right now, right?
We did this in a webinar.
We actually did this more recently in a webinar.
Bro, what average.
What was the actual question?
Okay, it was like how much, I can't remember, but it was along the lines of like, how much would you bet on you being able to
achieve your goals,
or something,
according to how you've kind of planned yourself out. And you could get good returns on that, right? And these students who are attending our webinar, I would suspect them, to very much care about their future.
High achievers. These are top 20%, top 10% of
And then we're expecting, maybe like $100, student-wise, kind of thing. And
the average was probably like 3 cents or something. The range was from like, the highest was probably like $20.
Yeah, it was $20.
And the lowest was like negative.
People are like, oh, negative. And I was just like, okay, hold on a sec. Like if that's what you're genuinely feeling, and in the webinar format, like you could say whatever you want, right? Like so what's stopping you from changing up your ways? What's stopping you from questioning, whether your approach is legitimate? I mean, you've already emotionally. And that's where a lot of students, at least emotionally, they're quite intact with how they feel about themselves. You're already emotionally like disproving yourself of like this process, then why don't you challenge it? And one thing that we always see with students is that they're very, very effort-based, right? Like very effort-based. Like they always ask us things like, how many hours do I need to study? How many questions do I got to do? Like how many past papers? And the question I throw back at them is, okay, let's think about this. If everyone studied 3 hours a day, which I'm sure a lot of people do, like why do people get different results? And that's like for many young people, I feel, it's like the first time in their lives they actually stopped and had a good think about, hold on a second, that's legitimate because I actually did that, and so did my mate, and so did my mate's mate, and we all ended up with different results. So there must be something more. So I think for us, working with students and kind of at the end of a very long day, sitting down, kind of concluded that there must be something else going on. And the messaging, although maybe culturally very in tune and appropriate, I mean, it's just a basic idea. And for us, I mean, we've kind of really thought about how to talk about effort as a component of success, right? We had to
So like hard work is necessary, right? But obviously, it's not the be all end all. Like it's what you're doing and that. With that effort,
it's one of the factors.
Yeah, it's one of the factors. It's one of the factors, but it's kind of considered as the only factor.
And it's just about outdoing other people, and you can only do so much. But one thing is that a lot of people see effort as the kind of vehicle to success. The more effort you put in, the success is proportional. And a lot of people, I think, trust that belief. But the issue is that when they put in that effort, especially more than the previous time in which they failed, they're like, all right, it's because of my effort. They get even more disappointed when that extra effort doesn't translate, to the results they want. Like a lot. And and I think fundamentally it's like they see effort as the only thing that is the vehicle to success. Whereas really, a lot of people tell me, oh, but Michael, practice makes perfect. I've been told that by like everyone. Not if you don't know what you're practicing. That's the first thing. And it's like, well, what is even practice? And they're like, oh, practice is just doing things and you get better. Fair enough. So how do you get better? Through practice, you essentially is a process of learning, trialing, and reviewing. And they're like, okay, like they're starting to kind of think about it. And the point of practicing before like an assessment, for example, is to identify issues, fix them up, so that when you're actually in the place that, and doing the thing that really, really matters, you've got nothing stopping you from achieving your success. So really it's about embracing, the mistakes that you make. And that in itself is like quite a big thing for Asian people, I think, to realize. And then because a lot of students, like nowadays we work with a lot of students, they are so put off by the fact that their effort might not actually translate to what they want. They procrastinate or they stop themselves from trying in the fear of what if, right? And these guys are like hardworking. They've got the right intentions and whatnot, but it's like a very massive self-limiting thing. Whereas I'm kind of telling them, why are you getting put off by the idea of making mistakes during practice? You're literally doing the right thing. You should be celebrating it.
Right.
Why are you not like jumping up and down and be like, hey mom, guess what? Today out of my study session, I found 10 more things that could have ruined me in my exam.
Oh, yeah.
But now I like realized that these things actually are really important. And I'm very, very happy that I found these mistakes.
Yeah, it's a big problem actually, because it goes beyond that. Like anything that may threaten their immediate feeling of like competence is like a challenge to their very sense of identity.
Yeah.
So if you say that, hey, like, look, you've got time between now and when you're trying, whatever your goal is. We can work on things. We have the opportunity right now to work on things, but we need to know what is it that you need to work on. But the very concept of learning that they are not already good enough is something that they would rather not even kind of consider. It is too scary to actually consider, which is, anyway, like this whole thing is just like basically one of the characteristic observations that we thought we'd start with. So I guess that's our introduction.
It's super interesting because I sort of relate to my own, I guess, education experience going through, say, high school, university, primary school. And we talked about this, Will and I on a podcast previously just between us. And I'd say, I don't know, I would say I didn't do great in high school. I didn't pass with flying colors, but I did okay. I wasn't like a top grade student, nor was I a failure, right? And I got really interested in the education system around sort of when I actually first watched a talk by Sir Ken Robinson.
Oh, yeah, of course.
So you guys, obviously, because you're in the education space, you know him. And it was his TED talk about how there is way too much, I guess, emphasis on rote learning. The education system is completely outdated. It was, basically formulated during the Industrial Revolution. It was basically to produce employees, right? And he's saying creativity is at the core of, a lot of now what learning should be. So I'm really interested to hear what you guys say, because for me, when I watched that, I was so shocked. I was like, wow. I was like, actually this really made me re-question the entire education process. It's like, I graduated in 2007 in high school. And so this was like internet was still maturing, and it was just like you just didn't have this sort of idea of what proper education really was. And you were subject to a lot of variables that you didn't have control over. You could either have great teachers or you could have horrible teachers, depending on the school you go to. There was who you surround yourself with. So I know that was a sort of very loaded question, but what is your take on the current education system?
Oh, that's a great question. We can talk about this for days, but I think going back to your reference to Sir Ken Robinson's video, for me as well, understanding that, hey, this guy is talking about what makes a lot of sense and I can something relate to. I think he talked about creativity as the ability to bring value. So the question then becomes, all right, what is value? It's a difficult question. And I remembered my young self, trying to figure what that even means. But the point is that I think it's very difficult for people to know what is valuable if they don't know themselves very well, and I think at the end of the day, a lot of people are not able to realize like what they really want. It's like, this is what a lot of people say, is going to lead me to lead this like valueful or, whatever life. And therefore I'm going to go seek it. And, for that, for the amount of motivation and effort to pursue something that you don't really fully understand, but sounds like a good idea, for me is pretty interesting. And the question is, well, if they really realize what they want to do and how the world works and how they fit in it and the kind of skills, experiences they need to fully understand this problem, I think that's a much better redirection of their, like effort, of their time, of their resources, whatever. So, similarly, we have a lot of conversation with students. Like we talk to students all the time. Like I would not be surprised if combined, like we talk to, I don't know, like 100 plus students a day, just they'll message us or they'll email us. And sometimes we get on the phone and have a chat with them because it requires that kind of conversation. And a lot of it comes back to, well, how well do you know yourself? And for example, how to manage expectations, huge. Asian people like expectations. I mean, you gave that example. Yeah, it's just like, what do you mean? Like, it's not even a thing. It's just like, here's a goal, go do it. And then, they expect is the other thing, to not make mistakes getting to it, right? But then we just mentioned before, if you don't make mistakes, then how can you improve and rise to the occasion? And they're kind of going in like hoping for the very best because their effort is paying off. But I think, at a core, there isn't a lot of, this is my personal opinion, that students aren't thrown into we'll call it this way, the deep end enough for them to fully need to, realize what they value and who they are, right? It is right now very, very content intensive. Got to get through heaps of stuff. Syllabus, exams all the time. It's funny, because one thing that I get asked a lot is for students who are applying for certain courses or maybe scholarships. These are high school students and these are top-notch students. They ask me this question. They go, "Hey, Michael, what's good voluntary work?"
Oh yeah, right? That's pretty common. Yeah.
Like, what do you consider? Like, can you give me a list? Like, where do I find it?
It's like, my dude, we need to talk about some fundamentals before we.
We're gonna go through childhood trauma, right?
Dive into this,
because they see it as like a checklist.
Yeah. They don't understand why the.
And I was just like, well, when you do voluntary work, like you need to wholeheartedly kind of do it, and you do it because you find it interesting, you want to contribute in whatever way you want to. And like for them, I know when I say that, it's just
They're
like,
oh yeah, sure, yeah. Go. But what's a good one? What's a good one for me to get this wholehearted fulfillment?
Yeah. Whatever you talked about.
Yeah.
This episode is produced and brought to you by Social Wave. Social Wave is a strategic content marketing agency helping businesses grow revenue using video, podcasts, and SEO. Head on over to socialwave.com.au to find out more. Now back to the show.
And then the other thing is like, well, like the school system and how schools are run, there's only so much exposure, right, to certain challenges. And, we get a lot of students who think and believe that they have good, skills, like for example, leadership, because they were, I don't know, prefect or school captain or whatever. And, that's great. But they kind of associate that with success in the real world. Like, oh, since I'm a leader at school, I'll be like, fine. Okay. When I finish uni and I'll be a leader, no problem. Right.
Well, I want to add to that because there's this, there's this huge pressure, right, to figure out like what you want to be when you grow up.
It's crazy.
Is that question? And I personally think it's a very damaging question that we shouldn't really be asking someone, what do you want to be? It's like, who do you want to be? Like, what type of person do you want to be? It's a lot more intrinsic. But because there's this huge pressure, there's this kind of idea around like when a person becomes a biological adult versus when they're societally an adult. So if you think about like 1901 or something, you're just trying to avoid the plague, you're like, not getting smallpox as you're like win at life.
World War's going on 10 years later.
Like things called guns are coming out and you're like, oh man, could mean, trouble. So at that age, to be a societal adult, right? Like you went through your, whatever you learned to read, you got good at reading and, you can count all the way to 20. And now you're like ready to go out there, tackle the challenges.
13,
so when you're like, you hear these stories of people that were like in the, grew up in the 30s or the 40s and, they grew up on the streets by themselves and they're like 8 years old. It's like, man, if you're a kid on 8 years old on the streets right now, you're going to die, So like the age at which you become a societal adult used to be a lot younger.
Yeah.
Whereas now, I can't remember, there's a particular research term for this, but like people say that the age of being a societal adult is close to like 25 or so now. Because now you got to figure out to be a societal adult, you need to know how to like manage your finances and the bank and all the other stuff. Yeah. And I don't know about you guys, I've only figured that out quite recently, So like I'm
still figuring it out.
I've thought I was an adult for a long time, but so like there are these sort of additional layers of complexity in order to navigate society effectively. And so there's more to learn because humanity knows more. There's more packed curriculums, there's more packed things, you know, in schools, there's all this expectation, and you're expected to get to that point when you're like 17, 18, or even younger.
You're expected to kind of have a pretty good idea in year 10, because that's when you do your subject selection.
Right. I felt that.
Right?
Yeah.
And then...
Like what, 14 years, 15 years old? Like who knows
what the hell they're going to be, right?
it's just
Choosing subjects.
And you know, you go for, I mean, you know, the Asian 5, right? Like you keep your options open.
The Asian 5.
Yeah, keep your Asians open.
Yeah,
Like a boy
keep the
band.
doors
Open to 5.
You know, if medicine doesn't work out, like you got a few other
always
things
dentistry.
that could maybe eventually get back to And then, you know, like what's the process of schools, or let's not talk about schools, just society, okay, in general, encouraging, you know, for example, kids to go out there and you know, work part-time, you know, or get like a little, you know, job somewhere, just so that they can, you know, actually have the experience of what it means. And that's the unique part. And
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that whole, you know, if you're selecting your subjects when you're in year 10,
that's crazy.
I mean, so when I have like consultations with parents and their kids, you know, and then the parents are like really worried, like, oh, they're already, you know, ending high school and they don't know what they're going to do anymore. They don't know, you know, the life that they want to lead. And I just go to the parent and I just say, do you feel like you figured out your life right now? And they're in their like 50s or 60s and they're like, they're still just as lost. They're just lost with different things. And it's like, okay, let's just not put that as the outcome of like trying to figure something out at the age where you've just essentially become like a real human, you know, like you're starting to become, there's so many things to figure out when you're like 15 years old. Like figuring out your career, I think should be a little bit.
There's this really cool story that I like that goes straight back to the point. And he's not an Asian dude, but I'll tell the story anyway. It's this guy who was going to school. Shut up, my family. So there's this guy. He went for the schooling system, same kind of deal, right? Like you go for the school system, they try and beat you down, and he was like head in the clouds the whole time. And his teachers were like, "Hayden, like come back to earth. Like what the hell are you doing?" And he was this mad surfer, like just loved surfing as a kid, really into it, right? And so all of his teachers were saying to his parents, look, you've got to stop him from surfing because he's just going to go nowhere. Like he's in the classroom, but his mind's running the waves. And so this whole process of him just like realizing at the point, like, this is what I want to do. Cut a long story short, he dropped out at year 10 in Australia, which is like the youngest legal age you can drop out, did all of that kind of stuff. And now the guy's worth $100 million because he got so into surfing that he learned everything he could about his passion, that he started designing and building surfboards. And now he's licensed his surfboard into so many other brands and stuff. So guy's like worth $100 million. But imagine if he listened and, you know, was like, okay, maybe I should focus on my studies.
I think the thing with those stories, right, is that like it shows that it's possible not to follow the grain. But the objection to that is that it's the exception. Most people that spend too much, you know, and that's the thing, is that it has to be statistically the norm.
Yeah.
And that actually, okay, so I've been recently looking at the research on this field called employability, and which is the idea of like, when you graduate university, like, do you actually get a job? And also, does that job provide you more than just income? Like, for example, is it the life that you want to lead, right? Or are you simply just graduating to become like this lifeless, soulless, you know, sort of shadow that works to keep the corporate machine running type thing, you know?
Sounds like you're a doctor, yeah.
Yeah, like, yeah. Did you?
You're right, man.
Okay, being a doctor can be a very fulfilling career. Yeah. Okay, so
For some.
if it fits.
Yeah.
But the sort of, I guess, like kind of debate, and more so like the realization we're coming to now, is that the school system, all the way from primary all the way through to tertiary, has to do more than just tick the boxes of the curriculum. It has to do more than just let you pass an assessment. It has to actually prepare you for life. And it has to prepare you for life in a way that you actually have at least a chance of finding fulfillment and satisfaction in the work that you do, rather than just having a job and that's it. And we're finding that we're really failing at that as an entire system. And I think in my discussions with teachers and people that are in the public education space, every individual I talk to knows that's the case, that there are these issues. But it's just about how would you go about creating this change? It's such an enormous
It's a systematic change.
Like, I mean, it's like the systematic change. The entire education system as we know it, like to rehaul that's insane, you know, to think about the scale of that type of change, how complicated it would be, how slow it would be, and the amount that we'd have to change it by. So
yeah, it's like a whole cultural thing, And I was going to say this something interesting, like, I remember growing up, you hear conversations from grown-ups, back then about, this guy made it, now he's like a millionaire, blah, 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 did this business, blah, blah, blah. And like, like how good of a life will that be if we like kind of live that way? And then you go, oh, I want to become an entrepreneur. And, I'm going to quit medicine and become an entrepreneur. And that conversation then becomes real. It's like, why would you do that? But it's because you've been telling us about these people who are amazing and do all these crazy things against the grain. Like there's an admiration there.
It's like there's this very famous singer kind of actor in Korea called Rain.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. He's quite well known. Like
He was big in the early 2000s. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, he's still like a
still pretty
well-regarded,
big
pretty
now,
big figure in Korea as well. Anyway, like his big thing was that he practiced like crazy. Like his thing was like he made it for himself because he worked really like that's the story that everyone kind of knows about him, right? And so you see him like come up in these like Korean shows, like talk shows or whatever, and they talk about a story, and I was like, oh, it's amazing. Like, you just dedicated yourself to practicing for hours and hours, learning to dance and learning to sing and like continually like applying and trying to, get these little roles and stuff. And like, man, like, and then you were able to really apply yourself like that so diligently so that you could, become the person that you are now. Like, isn't that amazing? Like, son, like, look, aren't they amazing? Stop practicing, go back to study.
Yeah.
It's like, the standards that they place on like musicians or whatever, that these people that do the things that are you would consider like against the grain, but I guess it's not really that against the grain if there's that many people that are doing it.
I don't think they think that far.
Yeah, oh, they definitely don't think that far. Yeah, I'm still deciding if they think.
Cool. So you guys also talk about like there's the amount of hours, like the amount of hours that you dedicate to it, right? It sounds like you guys are also saying, look, because that's only one variable, for me, at least in the very least, it's like the other part of that is the effectiveness of learning.
Of course.
Yeah.
Which is, it could be the velocity at which how per minute, per hour. I don't know what the definition of this is, but, my definition of that is like the meta learning, the idea of knowing how to learn effectively, right? And I watched a recent video by a guy called Johnny Harris, very well-known YouTuber, and he talks about language learning and things like, Pareto's principle, which is, your standard like 80-20. If you follow the current, language learning systems, they're going to teach you all of the technicalities of learning a language, whereas you should be learning about the, the top 10 or 20% most commonly used words, and then work backwards from there. So when it comes to effectiveness of learning, how do you guys teach it? I know there's very like many techniques, but like with iCanStudy, what would you say is sort of maybe the 3 to 5 things that you guys sort of really focus on?
I'll talk about more conceptually, and then you can maybe break it down into a little bit more.
I can go in a little bit more detail, but if you give a big picture.
I think the fundamental concept that we're getting people to realize is that with learning, it is actually like a definitive process. But I guess a lot of people didn't bother or weren't interested to look into it. So they kind of see it as just this thing you just kind of somewhat do. And, the effort thing, the more effort you put in, like naturally learning occurs.
It's like magic.
It's like magic. It's like magic. And then, I've talked to a lot of parents and, I ran, this was one time, a webinar, and it went really over time, but all the parents stayed. And at the end of it, I kind of asked them, so what was the biggest thing that you got out of this webinar that was like the most shocking thing? I mean, I wasn't trying to shock them purposely. And they're like, we just didn't really even realize that not all studying leads to learning. Like that was the fundamental, and that was literally the first thing I said in the entire like 4-hour session. So I was like, okay,
we got a lot to talk about.
We got a lot to talk about. And,
This is the like the analogy that I give for it, right? So let's say that you had like a book, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know if you guys ever heard this, but like, this idea, like, you can like sleep with your book, like under your pillow and like, maybe you like osmose, like
what? Or like listening to a lesson, while you go to bed.
You're sleeping. Yeah. Like it's kind of this thing that people sort of think of as a joke, but like in the back of their mind, some people are like, is it true? Like, could it work?
Like this is, I think it's a meme or something. Like there's this like Asian kid. It's just like, there's a book in front of him and he's just like, kind of doing this.
He's like scooping the knowledge. And like, it's like a ritual. He's like bathing himself in the knowledge.
And so it's gotten to that point where it's just like, if I do anything, it's gonna help in some way. So I'm just gonna kind of hope that it works out.
Yeah.
So a lot of people are actually very, very not, confident about it. But the question then becomes, all right, like if we're going to talk about at least making this learning thing more manageable, how can we discuss it? Well, we're talking about, obviously there's results, whatever it may be, but the kind of effort and energy that it takes to put into and get into these results. So we're talking about efficiency as an idea. And we ask students, do you think you're efficient? Like, I don't think anyone to this date.
They don't even know like what that even means to say if you're efficient.
And I think even if they know, they would just tend to say, no, I'm actually really not efficient. So then we start asking them. And I remember, again, I think, was it this? No, it was another webinar. And my webinars are quite like, we get to the heart of it,
Life-altering webinars.
It's my time to like talk to everyone about like what I see and, coming from a helpful, perspective. And I gave, again, it was for parents, and I gave an example of, okay, you're right, you've got this exam, your kid's got this exam. Kid A, kid B, for example, and then it's on, I don't know, end of November. Kid A starts studying, for example, 2 weeks before it. Okay, kid B starts studying for it 4 months before it. They end up getting the same scores, right? Who's better at studying? Someone's like, oh, kid B, obviously, starts 4 months before, right? And I'm like, but why? It's like, oh, because they worked hard. They're model student, but they got the same results. And then I reminded this person, just keep in mind, it's not just one subject and one test. There are many other things that you got to worry about, even within the school system. You don't just do one subject a year. You do 5 or 6 or whatever it is. So how do you expect them to even manage that if what you think is a definition of success is inefficiency, right? So I remember you saying something along the lines of this, and you can probably clarify that a little bit better. But isn't the measure, of success or being good at something like to achieve your goal with least effort and time?
Yes.
Right? Like just as a general concept. So it's kind of like, all right, I've realized through this approach that this will not allow me to achieve these results in the least time possible. So what can I do, right, to make that a reality? So that's like the angle that you should be really thinking about it. Because if people are really good, like for example, we look at, my wife bakes quite a bit, and then a good, I guess, baker. And by the way, if anyone's listening, I don't bake. Okay, so I have no idea what I'm really talking about. But just with the example, I would imagine if someone's running a bakery, they would be a good baker to consistently produce good baking, but for the same time, they produce, 20 items versus 1, right? So that is like, that's efficiency. That's if you want to survive in the business world.
Yes.
You got to be efficient, like at least more efficient than other people. And that's just, or else you're going to die. And it's very, very, very common, obviously, to see businesses who haven't realized that, therefore they haven't adapted. And that's just the survival of the fittest. Well, what are we telling our kids about that, in the education system?
Yeah. So this idea of like efficiency and like how like the learning per minute, whatever we want to call it, is a really big area of interest for me. In fact, that's an area that I'm gearing up to do some real focused research on myself. And the fundamental premise that it has to start on is the idea that like not all studying is equal to learning. So going back to the, like bathing yourself in knowledge, you can shred up the pages and shower in it for you. It's not going to make a difference. So we understand that that's like an irrelevant thing to do. Like you wouldn't expect that. Okay, well, what about this? Like, let's say that you take the book and you open it up and you slap someone in the face with the pages. Have they learned now? It's like, no, right? What if you slap them real slow? Okay, have they learned now? It's like, what if you slap them so slowly they can actually read the words as it approaches their face? Well, like they learn a little bit. Like they learn a few words that they read, right? Okay, let's just not slap them, and let's just get them to like just generally like touch the pages and look at some of the things and just like flick a few things around. Are they learning? Like marginally a little bit better, right? So we know that there's kind of the spectrum where like different activities produce like different levels of learning, like different stuff is going on. But then we sort of just stop. At a certain point, we say, at a certain point, it's like learning happens. And it's like, now I am learning. It's just a binary. It's like, these are ineffective and then this is effective. But why? Because everyone else is doing it. How do you study? You just read something, you write some notes about it, you write them again, you repeat them. Maybe you do some flashcards, whatever it is. It's like, I'm doing this. This is effective. Why is it effective? Because that's how people study. That doesn't make sense. You can't say this is an effective way of studying because this is how other people study, right? It's a logical fallacy.
And the thing is that, on top of the whole efficiency thing, which, for the same time you dedicate, you get a lot more out of, whatever you're doing.
Right.
So obviously that's how you really get ahead.
Yep.
Not to be more inefficient and actually end up compromising sleep, which is what a lot of people do.
So a thing that I usually say, right, is that like, when we think about like the way that we learn, we should start by thinking about it in terms of what is the like the probability that you will achieve your learning goal or be successful compared to all the people that are using that technique, right? So if you have a technique that is, that you take the 100 top achievers for a certain subject or a certain domain, and we look at the 100 top achievers and we say, these 100 top, of the 100 top achievers, 99 of them are using this technique, right? And I said that to you, right? I was like, guys, let me just teach you about this technique. 99 out of 100 of the top achievers are going to be using this technique, right? And, we're going to sit down and do a little bit of a workshop on this technique. Are you going to be interested to learn what this technique is?
100%.
Yeah. Well, you shouldn't be.
Why?
Because you're not asking the most important question. How many other people are using this technique? Let me tell you, let me do it this way. Let's say there's 1 million people. Okay. Of the million, 999,999 are using this technique. Okay. 100 of those people are successful. Well, 99 of those people are successful. 99 of the top 100 might be using a certain technique, but the, overwhelming majority of people that use the technique are not actually doing well, right? So there's lots of common things that people do. And just because people that do well do them doesn't mean that that was the reason that they did well. It could just be something that
It's basic science, like correlation doesn't equal causation, right?
So we have to be thinking about it differently. We have to think, what are the people that are doing well doing that other people are not doing? What's the exclusive thing that they are doing that other people are not doing? That's a much more difficult question to answer. And so going back to your original question in terms of like, how do we kind of break that down in the stuff that we teach? What we do is we think about that and we isolate it down to the very specific processes that exclusively are demonstrated among consistent levels of learning achievement. And then how do we pair that with a technique that directly triggers that, right? So if I say like, I don't know, like if I say you're a jerk, that will trigger immediately a feeling where you're just like, screw you. Like,
screw you, man.
Yeah, as predicted, the response, right? So, there's, certain things will trigger certain processes. So as, just like with studying, we can use certain techniques to trigger certain processes. And again, we know this is true. Like we know this intuitively, right? And if we can figure out what those processes are and what the techniques are that pair it, and we bring that all together in a system that's smooth and is fluent and is actually time efficient, that is what allows the time that is spent to get you more bang for buck, more learning per minute. That's kind of the gist of it without going into like a lot more complex detail.
That's the end of part 1. Tune in next week for part 2, but in the meantime, here's a little snippet of next week's episode.
I work with a lot of career advisors. One time I was just like, so just out of interest, like how do you prepare these students for university? And they go, that's what the university does. And I then kind of talked to the uni. I was like, hey, like what do you guys do to help like the assimilation? That's what career advisors do. I was just like, okay, so like
who's taking responsibility?
Yeah.
Thanks for listening to the Level Asian podcast. Make sure you subscribe and leave us a 5-star review if you enjoyed the episode. And why not share it with friends and family who might enjoy it too? Also, make sure you head over to levelasianpodcast.com to join our email list and to receive the latest updates and get notified when the next episode drops. If you know a great guest we should feature, email us at contact@levelasianpodcast.com or DM us on our socials in the show notes. Catch you on the next episode.